thank you for giving me a little bit of time. I know we're not on the agenda, so I don't want to take too much time. I'm with Dig It Up, Backhoe Services, and we have a couple items that we would like to address or maybe get some input on. There was, just recently we had bid on demo projects, and there was 3 that we were low bidders on, and we did receive confirmation that bids were rejected due to exceeding engineer's estimate. I guess we asked why that is, because in the past we've done jobs with the city that have been over engineers' estimates, and to just reject them on that note, we'd like a little more information. I think we've got a good track record with the city. We don't have any jobs that were outstanding or we failed on. With that being said, we feel that we should have been awarded those jobs, or should be. Not only with that, you go out to rebid, now it's costing city more money, taxpayers more money. So I guess that's one of our concerns, or not concerns, just an item. Also, we are currently working on the Home Sweet Home project. We are at a standstill. We've been for a little while now. Unforeseen issues with the building itself. We understand that. However, we have asked, previous to this date, to get some direction from someone, either that being a structural engineer, whomever. We're not gonna do it just because we're contractors and we know what we're doing. We need direction. To this date, we still don't have an answer. There's other numerous delays that we've faced with the project. And we feel that we are not out of line to ask for a partial payment either on the work that's completed. And that's looking at about 40% we feel is completed. And we did submit a pay app. I don't know if anyone's seen it, and you may not. And I guess where we go from here is we ask you members and the mayor to possibly look into this. It's we need some answers, and we need to know what we're doing. We're trying to schedule our workload out, and then we're hung up on a project, or we bid and we're awarded, we gear up to go, and then it's rejected. We just feel it's impacting on our business.
Well, I appreciate you coming forward, Mr. Larson, and this might be an opportunity to perhaps just address the item number 1, which is the low bid, even though it came in over engineers' estimates. I know several times that we've rejected low bids that came in over estimates simply because we have a budget to work on, and trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars and things like that. It has happened in the past, and I'm sure in no way reflects anything on to you as a business or to a company here in Minot. And I could probably look to our city manager or to Mr. Jonason for that kind of confirmation, but that would be my direct answer to that. As far as the Home Sweet Home issue goes, I think, is that something that you want to address, city manager or Mr. Zakian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, your first point, Mr. Mayor, is dead right. Our budgets are based upon the engineer's estimates, and when we bid out projects and those bids come in higher than engineers' estimates, if there isn't sufficient funding in the budget, we can't authorize the expenditure of the funds without going through a budget amendment process or seeking additional funds to cover that, or alternatively rebidding the project. Additionally, oftentimes rebidding the project does result in a lower cost to the city, contrary to your remarks that it might cost us more. I'll point you to the example of the flood control bidding that just happened recently, where the city saved $21 million by rebidding the projects on flood control. So that, I think, addresses your first question. The second question, in regard to the Home Sweet Home delays, I'd like to ask, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, for John Zakian to come up and speak to this issue. He's been very involved in the relocation of the Home Sweet Home building and can update us as well on the structural concerns associated with the underlying beams and some of the delays that's caused in the relocation of that building.
Absolutely. Stick close, Mr. Larson, if you have any follow-up questions. Sure. Thank you.
Mayor and members of the council, on the first item, remember that these are NDR funds, and in addition to what Mayor, you and the city manager have already enunciated, we are required under the HUD rules to follow a necessary and reasonable standard. It is very rigid and strict. In terms of bids like this, we are required to have an engineer's estimate. One of the engagements that we pay for with CDM Smith is their engineering expertise. And anytime we do a bid like this, we do an engineer's estimate. In the case of, there were 4 bids, Dig It Up was the low bidder for 3 of the 4. All the bids significantly, like well above 10%, significantly exceeded the engineer's estimate. HUD's approach is that you should not award when you're in such a situation like that, and that the best route to take is to rebid and see what the response is, and also work with the engineer to get a sense from the engineer as to the current market. The rebid is actually out and is currently open for bidding. The plan is to bring that back to this council at the Committee of the Whole at the end of August. In the context of Home Sweet Home, once it was elevated, we became aware that there may be structural issues related to Home Sweet Home. Again, HUD requires us to do due diligence. One of the subcontractors for CDM Smith, for which we are paying as part of their overall support services, is a firm with engineering expertise. When this became made aware to me definitively as a possible issue, I turned to CDM Smith, and they actually went out to the site, their engineer, and did an assessment. I anticipate receiving their report tomorrow morning. That report is going to tell me 2 key things, which were the questions I asked because of the due diligence requirement of HUD. One, are the conditions that may have been identified as possible structural challenges in moving the house to the permanent new foundation the result of wear and tear that we could not see because of the way the foundation was built on the original site? Or was there any cause for the condition, if it was found to be in a structurally unsound manner, that was a result of any construction activity that took place? The second question is, if there are structural measures that need to be addressed in order to finally move the house onto the permanent foundation, what is the scope, and what, again, going back to my engineering estimates, what is the estimated cost if we have to incur additional cost? All that information will be made available to me tomorrow, and then we will move forward appropriately. The final piece, I am sympathetic to Dig It Up in the context that this was a unit bid price. It had originally been anticipated that this all would be done by now. We have been working diligently and cooperatively with the flood control project to make sure we stay out of their way and they stay out of our way. When you have a complex myriad type of activities, multiple contractors and subcontractors, there are going to be delays, especially when you have unanticipated, and a project like this always happens. I have received their request twice now, once today and once several weeks ago. It is a challenge for us because we did do it as a unit bid price, But HUD does allow some leeway in that, and I'm reviewing that now to make sure we are in compliance. But also connected to that is I want to get the engineer's report. The preliminary information that's been given to me is that it appears to be all from wear and tear on the house and more impact from the flood. I just want that confirmed before we go forward. When I have all the information, then we'll be able to proceed further. I suspect I'll be coming back to this body again.
Mr. Zakian, regarding Mr. Larson's request for partial payment on that, is that something with the bid, the unit bid price that is holding that up, or where does that?
Yeah, I mean, HUD does allow a little leeway, especially in a situation like this. What I'm doing is getting it documented as to each step of the way that caused us to have these delays out of anybody's control, both Dig It Up and also the contractors on the flood control project side. Once I have that all documented and formalized, I can probably proceed.
For the sake of time frame for Mr. Larson, is there a time frame that after you've had a chance to review that tomorrow, or are you looking at 30 days to get to the next?
No later than 30 days.
No later than 30 days.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Straight, did you have a question?
Mr. Zakian, real quick, just out of curiosity, so we did a structural analysis, obviously, before we moved the building, so we could obviously see the impacts of the flood, and then we lifted, raised the structure, and moved it, and since then, we have a deliberation about the structural integrity of the building?
Well, and this gets back to the core of what I said in terms of it's a two-part engineering report. It has been reliably related to me by multiple parties involved in this, that the joists and other related support that are the underpinning of the actual house were not accessible because there were two foundations. There was an inner foundation and an exterior foundation. And there was no way for the engineer, or for that matter, Dig It Up, to be able to see that the guts of the wood foundation primarily. And it wasn't until it was elevated that there was able to be a site view of this. And from the appearance of the site view, which included our building inspector, it appears that there are structural challenges that might pose a threat for it to be actually put onto the new foundation, which is done, to the credit of Dig It Up. So what I had asked for was the engineering consultant, subcontractor for the APC, to do a deep dive analysis. One, make sure that and affirm that what has occurred is all a result of flood damage and old age, and could not have been visually identified where it was sitting on the foundation. And if that is the case, then to give us a scope of work that needs to be done and a cost estimate.
Thanks for that, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Zakian, mainly just for the public's knowledge for that whole story. They're not as privy sometimes to the information we receive, so thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Mr. Larson, do you have any follow-up questions or comments at this point? If not, I would give Mr. Zakian a couple of days and follow up with him, and hopefully we can proceed from that point on. Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else who wishes to come forward at this time? If not, we will move on to reports. First is the mayor's report. I do have a few things on my list tonight. I will try to keep all of it brief. Some time ago, we had talked about putting together at some point some reports in terms of the different aldermen who are assigned to some of the different committees throughout our city and don't often find out about what is going on within each of those committees. So what I'm hoping to do is initiate next month oral reports that that will come at the other business section of our city council meetings. Small, brief, abbreviated reports on what actionable things are going on within each of the different committees. Understandable that time can certainly be a constraint within our city council meetings, so I would hope to keep these brief, but at least at this point we can at least get out to the public in terms of what is going on in each of the different months that in the era of transparency throughout all of the different committees, because we certainly know that there's a lot of different activities that go on and don't always certainly make the privy of City Council. With that, I will go through my monthly activities here, and of course, it was certainly a busy month. On July 5th, I had an opportunity to sit down with Senator Heitkamp for the better part of an hour and talk about what some of our challenges are and opportunities within the city of Minot. On the 9th, then I met with representatives from Independence Inc. On the 10th, I met collectively with the Park and Recs Consolidation Group. That was our first meeting. Then on the 11th, City Manager Barry and I traveled to Bismarck to meet with a group concerning Hub City funding ahead of the next legislative session. On the 11th, then, City Manager Barry and I actually, on the 12th, we attended the Taxation Committee the following day, where Mr. Berry testified to the group regarding Minot's taxation and use of special assessments. On the 12th, I attended an MADC board meeting at Mesa Arena. On the 16th, assisted with the Community Development Director interviews for the candidates here at City Hall. On the 17th, chaired a meeting with Major General Kaiser and the other officials from the Army Corps of Engineers and toured the different flood projects that are ongoing right now. Very good meeting that I think was very productive. On the 18th, attended the Service Basin Planning Input Session at the Minot Auditorium. Also on the 18th, met with Kylie Overson, the candidate for the North Dakota Tax Commissioner, at her request, also talking about some of Minot's challenges. On the 18th as well, attended a meeting following up on the Community Development Director position. On the 20th, met with Kelly Armstrong, a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives. On the 20th, welcomed a large crowd at the grandstands for the opening of the North Dakota State Fair and introduced Cole Swindell for the kickoff of the concerts. On the 21st, then, we had the North Dakota State Fair Parade. On the 22nd, then, attended the State Water Commission meeting at the Ward County Administration Building. 22nd was Task Force 21 at the Chamber of Commerce. 25th was the State Fair Social at the Carousel. On the 27th, attended the MADC Economic Development Committee. Also on the 27th, met with David Ashley for the Souris River Joint Board on the 27th again, and was back on the grandstand to help introduce a couple of the big performers for the 2009 State Fair concert. If you didn't hear, it's Rascal Flatts and Tim McGraw. So get your tickets now, or at least when they do come on sale. And then introduced Dierks Bentley. On the 30th, attended a meeting for the potential Parks and Rec merger, met with Governor Burgum's policy advisor, Jace Beeler, on the 30th, and then met with a group at the Chamber office about the possible future expansion of Highway 52. Also on the 31st, attended the Minot Air Force Base Missile Wing change of command ceremony. August 1st, attended the MADC Executive Committee. August 2nd, met with Paul Strokeland concerning the Mayor's Committee on Addiction. Hope to have more on that at next month's meeting. And then on the 2nd, attended the Souris River Joint Board meeting at the auditorium. 3 left. Attended a meeting with the downtown business professionals about the IEDC report on the 3rd. And then today met with the leadership at Dakota Square Mall and met with the stakeholders group at Job Services of North Dakota. And yes, Kelly, I will give you this so you don't have to write them all down. Finally, I do want to congratulate Renee and all of the North Dakota State Fair staff for what was a fantastic North Dakota State Fair. Very well attended, and if you certainly didn't make it out, there were quite a few different things out at the State Fair, and they're already looking at different ways to improve on next year's State Fair. That is all of my meetings, with the exception of some of the other individual meetings that I had with folks. So with that, I'll turn to the city manager for his report.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, I apologize. I do have a couple of appointments in front of you.
I'll move both of the appointments.
Alderman Olson with a motion, second by Janser. Call the roll, please.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Titma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
And with that, we can turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. It's my privilege to give to you this month's City Manager's Report. I first want to second what the Mayor said about the North Dakota State Fair. I think I visited the State Fair every single day but one, and the rest of my family visited the State Fair every single day. So we were excited to be there, excited to be a part of it. There's so much to do, and it is such an absolute treasure to our community to have Minot host the annual North Dakota State Fair. So that was just an absolute good time for all of those who attended. So again, hats off to Renee and her team as well for that. We'll jump in with some important dates for this month's update. MADC board meeting on the 9th, Water Topics tour, and the Water Topics meetings will occur on the 13th and 14th of this month. So you want to make sure you have that on your calendar if you can make those. Chamber board is going to be meeting at 7:30. There's a Park South ribbon cutting that'll occur at 11 o'clock on the 21st. I'll speak more to that here in just a moment, but you want to make sure you have that on your agenda too. That's exciting ribbon cutting. Planning Commission will occur on the 27th at 6:30. Committee of the Whole meetings will be on the 28th and 29th at 4:15. And then finally, the next City Council meeting is scheduled for September 4th at 6:30. As you might imagine, we have spent considerable time over the last several months, and in particular, this last month, putting the city's preliminary budget together. I'll have a lot more for you on that later in the agenda, but suffice it to say, this has kept myself, our department heads, and most of our finance staff very busy for some time. And I want to thank them very much for all of their hard work and effort and contribution in pulling together the budget, which we'll present to you soon. We will develop a frequently asked questions correspondence for you so that you can also help communicate what's going on inside the budget with those that you meet with on a regular basis as we lead up to the public hearing. So you should expect that over the next week or so. I did want to let you know I attended a City Administrators Forum down in Bismarck. We talked about a number of different things, in part gearing up for this next legislative session, also the North Dakota League of Cities conference that's coming up here next month, and in addition to just general networking and operational issues and concerns that involve or affect a number of cities across the state of North Dakota. We did talk about the Legacy Loan Fund. You've all probably become familiar with the announcements that have come out on that and the work that's going on behind the scenes as well as it relates to trying to develop an access to the principal or the interest, depending upon which bill will move forward, on the legacy phone or legacy loan for infrastructure projects. So stay tuned. That will likely see a lot of iterations before it comes out to the full legislature next year. The special assessments have gotten quite a bit of attention by the legislature and the Interim Taxation Committee. I would expect to see sizable and significant efforts on reforming special assessments and how they're used. I don't know what that's going to look like. There's a lot of different ideas floating out there, but we're monitoring that. Special assessment refund bills, special assessment calculations, benefit areas, all these sorts of things are all sort of intermingled and mixed in here. There was some discussion about the homestead credit bill and how that may change and how that might affect local municipalities as well as it relates to property tax collections. Number of other items. Unfortunately, the governor was unable to meet with us. Seems like the vice president took precedence, his meeting with the vice president over us, so that seems to make sense. We didn't give him too much grief over that, but that's at least the story we heard. So in any event, I've been to the Capitol a couple times over the last month. As the mayor mentioned, he and I did travel down to talk with the other hub cities and Senator Rich Wardner, who is the committee chair of the Energy Development and Transmission Committee. And I think we do have an agreement on a funding formula that will be carried forward to the full legislature. And that agreement would allow for an increase to the city of Minot's share of about $2.5 million more than we currently receive now, or almost 50% more than our current funding allotment. So I feel like our efforts have been well received, although some difficult conversations did ensue regarding our pursuit of increasing the funding coming to Minot. At the end of the day, at least at this point in time, it seems like everybody's in agreement, and we have all joined arms in presenting a unified piece of legislation through the leadership of Senator Wardner. This was my second visit, actually, where we were talking about a number of different issues regarding property and sales taxes. A number of cities were asked to come and share their insights and their utilization of property taxes and sales taxes and other sorts of things. We were also asked to weigh in on our opinions as to whether or not we would be supportive of seeing the closing or the termination of the Renaissance Zone opportunities or legislation, which would essentially eliminate all Renaissance zone opportunities for cities across the state. We vehemently testified against that. I think that we were heard loud and clear. So I don't know at this point in time that we would expect to see anything be floated on that, but that is still something that was of interest to that particular committee. We did provide additional context to the city's financial position, as I mentioned, and also to address specific points about our city's budget, including financial obligations, debt load, property tax use, city growth, as well as future funding needs, and so on and so forth. I wanted to let you know that the North Dakota League of Cities Conference is going to occur on September 13th. You should attend if you get an opportunity. It will be held in Grand Forks this year. And it's not just on September 13th. It's actually multiple days. Starts generally on Thursday, goes to Friday and the Saturday also. We did put in a number of awards nominations. And I just wanted to let the City Council know sort of my philosophy and approach to for the City of Minot. As I've mentioned to all the department heads, it is important that we be recognized for the good work that we're doing as stewards of the City of Minot. I can't tell you each and every day as I visit with department heads and their staff how much fundamental good work is going on in our town and in our community. And it's a shame that we're not squeaking our own horns, if you will, or whatnot, and letting others know. So I have challenged the department heads, just as I did last year, again this year, to identify areas where we are shining and to submit with me nominations for those areas to the North Dakota League of Cities. So the three nominations that we had for this year for Leadership Excellence Award was former Mayor Chuck Barney and his work on the on not just all the activities that he was involved in during his 4-year tenure as mayor, but most importantly the Mayor's Addiction Committee. That work in and of itself was being identified as being recognized. Minot's move to automation and also our downtown infrastructure projects were also identified as noteworthy projects and are under evaluation by the North Dakota League of Cities. We hope to hear from them here fairly shortly about our status on those. So next I wanted to go and talk with you about the parking ramps. It's been some time since I visited with you about this topic. It's been quiet, but don't mistake that as no activity taking place. First of all, there's been major activity. The first major activity on the parking ramp case has been in and around Cypress's petition to the courts to move for a change of venue. They'd like to see the case heard in Bismarck. We've testified against that. It's been heard by the judge, and we're awaiting a ruling on that. So I can't tell you where that's going to end up, but we do expect the judge to rule on that fairly soon. We did conduct a structural analysis that occurred last week. We are waiting for the final report, but initially, according to the engineers that were on site, they don't see anything majorly structurally concerning. They do recommend preserving the building, in particular, depending upon how much time that building will be essentially roofless. So we do want to consider that. Their report will include recommendations of that type. We'll share that with you as soon as we get it. As well, staff have been busy making improvements to the parking ramps. We have plugged as many of the holes as possible on the roof, so the penetrations will not allow for water to seep in any longer, because remember, what we're calling the roof really isn't a roof. It's just the top level of the parking garage. Roof repairs, which were actual temporary roofs over the stairwells and the elevator shafts, those were leaking as well, so that's been repaired. We will be doing some detailed sweeping very, very soon. We have replaced the parking metering broken equipment, and we are working toward project closeout on the project. We want to make sure that we don't close the project out until we are certain through the structural analysis that there isn't additional work that needs to be done on the punch list by the contractor. So that's why we're intentionally holding that up at the moment. We, as you may know, have been working on 2 committees to talk about the potential merging of both the 2 libraries, the Ward County Library as well as the City of Minot Library, and also the Parks District with the recreation activities or components or programs of the city. So there have been several meetings so far on both of these topics, and those meetings will continue as we go. They are public meetings, so anyone from the community can attend those if they're so interested. There is a resolution that is going to be discussed here this evening with City Council that had already gone through the Ward County Commission. So there'll be more opportunity to discuss that here in just a moment. Briefly in construction, I'll just update you on a couple really big projects. The Northwest Water Tower was raised, in case you hadn't looked up and noticed that. It's a pretty exciting project. That is nearing completion here, which we're very excited about. The Broadway Bridge beams were placed here recently. That project also is on schedule. And the 83 bypass progress is moving along nicely as well. There's more information about those construction projects and additional construction projects in the brief that you've been handed in paper form, so you'll want to consult that. Additionally, there is another brief that I've provided in regards to NDR, the National Disaster Resiliency Programs. A couple big things. The Park South ribbon cutting is going to occur on the 21st. That's a huge project because that's the first project that was originally conceived and included in the application many years ago as a low to moderate income housing improvement project. It's very cool to see that project and it as an example of how a private-public partnership can work to advance very well to fruition and in a timely manner the needs of the community and the interests of our business community as well. So we're very excited about that. You don't want to miss the ribbon cutting and the tour as well. I've been told it's going to be quite something to see, especially if you saw the before building and now to watch the after. I think you'll be amazed. My not substantial amendment for the gathering space was approved, so that's exciting. We're moving forward with that. And Home Sweet Home has a new foundation, as we just heard. A little bit of concern as it relates to now its permanent settling on that foundation with regard to some of the potential structural issues. So we're doing due diligence, as was mentioned. We'll go through that, make sure that we're good, and then we can finish that project out. Also, lastly, the Neighborhood Next Door program. Remember, this is where we had a number of very vacant lots that were identified and the homes torn down and the lots just sort of unused. We've been able to sell all 15 properties successfully through an auction, and what that does is allows us to put those properties back on the tax roll and alleviate any costs associated with the city for maintaining those properties as well. So that's been good to see. We did have our first free dump week this a couple weeks back, a week of July 16th. 641 residents used the service. We had 133 tons of material that were disposed, including almost 200 tires and appliances that were dumped in this week of free dumping. We will include that in the future as well. This was essentially our first one since automation had occurred. I don't want you to forget about National Night Out. This is a really fantastic program that our city, as well as hundreds and hundreds of other cities across the country, participate in. It'll be held August 7th from 5:30 to 8 p.m., and it's a great community partnering opportunity between a number of our public safety and health providers and other businesses throughout our community coming together with the city and talking about a number of different things, including community building, strengthening, health, public service, public safety, and so on and so forth. So don't forget to put that on your calendars and plan to attend. Lastly, I wanted to talk with you quickly about the Community Development Director. We had been recruiting for a few months for a new Community Development Director. Recruiting did occur. We got multiple applications from more than a dozen different individuals. We had 3 finalists that were interviewed. One was offered the job, and unfortunately, we were competing for that particular person, and that individual did accept a job offer with another organization. So our intention is to reopen the recruitment at this point in time and try to see if we can't fill that position as diligently as we can. So with that, I'll stop for questions or any comments you might have.
Any questions for the city manager? Mr. Walsh, Alderman Walski.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. Mr. Berry, just a brief comment. Wanted to thank you and the staff for the excellent work that's going on in the parking garages. I wander through them on a fairly regular basis, and the improvements that are being made are noticeable. The graffiti that in some cases was there for more than a year is now covered up, cleaned up. So I appreciate the efforts that everybody is making down there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Simmet. Tom, I wanted to also say thanks to city staff for working with some residents on the neighborhood next door lot program. I had a couple folks that reached out, wanted more information. I passed around contact information out to Public Works and city staff, and they said they had a great response and a great willingness to work with them, so it's been very positive. So thanks, and thanks to Public Works staff for that as well.
Thank you.
Alderman Padrigula.
Also wanted to thank you and through you, the police chief and the police department. A week ago on Tuesday, I spent the night shift minus 1 hour, so I spent 9 hours riding along with the police department and was very impressed with the quality of work they did. The two officers in particular I spent most of the time with gave me an excellent orientation. It was a very educational, fun evening. Also helped me realize some of the challenges we face in terms of city employee, particularly public safety, recruitment and retention. It was kind of scary where one of the officers I drove with is one of the more senior people on the night shift, and she's been there 3 years. And I met with the police chief later for maybe an hour or so and gave him very detailed feedback on what I was seeing and what I was hearing. And I felt very comfortable. I felt very safe driving around with these people and seeing what they do to keep our communities safe. So it was a really very good experience, and again wanted to thank the police I was with and the department and you for the high quality of service we give.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Barry.
Thank you.
And that takes us over to our report from our city attorney.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, I submitted a written report. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the city attorney? Seeing none, let's move on to consider the report of the Planning Commission. I have been asked to pull 1 through 4. Do I have any other items that need to be pulled, or I would entertain a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would move approval on the remaining items.
Motion by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Any other items from the public that they would want to pull? Otherwise, number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 will be passed in consent. If you do want any one of those items pulled, please raise your hand or let us know. Otherwise, they will be passed with recommendations from the Planning Commission. Any further discussion? Call the roll on consent on 5 through 10.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. That takes us to consider the report for number 1 and the subdivision of the Family Recreation Edition, lot number 1. And with this, before I take a motion on this, I should probably turn to our city manager for a few comments on this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I requested that items 1, 2, 3, and 4 be pulled this evening because of the failure of the application to meet the requirements of our current ordinance for public zoning. You may recall that when we had a recent public zoning rezone application come through, the community was concerned about whether or not applications were meeting the intention of the ordinances that were on the books. We've begun reviewing those ordinances and found them to be extremely onerous for applications, particularly our public zoning, regarding rezones to the public zone designation. So when the Parks District's applications, which is what you see, or requests in 1, 2, 3, and 4 came through, we felt it prudent that in order to do our level best in meeting the application requirements, that we essentially hold this until we can get the revisions to the ordinance put into place, which the steering committee, the planning steering committee, was beginning to do work on. I've talked with our interim planning director, Mr. Lance Lang, who's reconvening the steering committee to take up this very issue and move forward some advancements that will bring more into alignment the zoning application requirements to make it essentially more consistent with the private sector applications. So our recommendation here is to essentially hold off on the items 1, 2, 3, and 4, and to direct staff to revise the ordinances as appropriate to address this inconsistency, and additionally recommend that this be reheard by the Planning Commission at their October Planning Commission meeting.
Be looking for a motion to send it back to planning to be heard in October, to send it back to planning and heard back in October. Mr. Alderman Walsky.
I would move the recommendations of our city manager.
Moved by Alderman Walsky.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. My only discussion on this is I have had a conversation with the Parks Director, Mr. Merritt, and we discussed this at length, and he said that this does not create a problem at all for the Parks Department at this time. So they're okay with moving it back until we can address the fundamental issues that City Manager Barry had pointed out. Any further discussion on the motion? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion passes. That takes us to number 10, consider the report of the Committee of the Whole. I have been asked to pull number 7. Do I have any other items that need to be pulled at this time? Does anyone in the audience want any other item pulled other than number 7? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I
Alderman-
move consent on the remaining items.
Thank you. We have a motion for consent on all items but number 7 from Mr. Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Again, last chance for anyone to pull any item from the Committee of the Whole from July 31st, 1 through 6, and 8 through 12 will be passed in consent. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion passes. Takes us to number 7 in the award of the bid, Library Digital Sign, Library 0333. The attachment was included within our packets and online documentation. Looking for a motion on number 7.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the recommendation.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion. I think the item was forwarded without recommendation from the Committee of the Whole, if I remember correctly, until we had seen the bids that still were not available, which is why I think this item was pulled individually.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Janser.
Upon reviewing the write-up on the bid tabulation, it appeared reasonable to me, so that's why I made a motion to approve it.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Olson.
I just think that I would like to publicly thank the Friends of the Library who are helping the Minot Public Library in this endeavor to put a sign out in front of the library. So they've made a generous donation towards this project.
Absolutely. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion passes. That takes us to number 11, consider the report of the Committee of the Whole from August 1st. Number 1 was taken care of with a public hearing. I've been asked to pull number 7, 11, and 12.
Move approval on the remaining items.
Motion by Alderman Olson. This is 2 through 6 and 8 through 10. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Does anyone else from the audience have any other items that they would like pulled from the Committee of the Whole report from August 1st? We're pulling number 7, 11, and 12, and again, the remaining items would be passed to consent as they were moved from Committee of the Whole. Any further discussion from the council? Please call the roll.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion passes. That takes us to number 7, the Storm Sewer Crane Truck Project 4322 bid award.
Move approval.
Move approval from Alderman Olson.
Second.
second by Alderman Janser. Discussion. Yes, Alderman Walski.
Mayor, Dan, Wednesday's discussion, I had a bit of a misunderstanding on my part. My question, Dan, is if we don't have this truck on in our toolbox right now, how are we doing that work? I guess that's what I'm curious about.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Walski, right now, if we need to get something out to the side or get a pump pulled or something out there, we run a loader out there and we'll use a loader to pull it, which I don't think is very efficient because, say for example, we need to haul a section of pipe out for storm sewer repair. We load it onto the trailer with a loader, trailer it out there, take the loader out there, unload it, and use it. Now we can simply utilize a crane, load it onto the crane truck, and haul it out there and unload it with the truck.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions for Public Works Director Jonassen? Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion on the item? Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Walski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion passes. Number 11, the Dangerous Dog Ordinance, amending and reenacting 727 of Chapter 7. I would entertain a motion on this. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move the item.
Moved by Alderman Straight.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion. Alderman Padragula.
Thank you. I wanted to ask one question of Alderman Straight and/or the city attorney, and depending on the answer to that question, suggest either 2 or 3 amendments at this point to try to tighten up the ordinance a little bit. I think it's a significant bit of progress and improvement, but I did have one question and 2 potential alterations. The first question I had is when I carefully reviewed this ordinance and compared it with its prior version, I noticed that one of the criteria for under 7-25, one of the criteria for defining destructive and annoying animals prohibited was removed, and that was the reasonable person standard definition of the animal frightening another individual. And I wanted to ask if that was an oversight or if that was deliberately done, and if it was deliberately done, what the rationale behind that was.
I think we would turn to our city attorney to see if we have any clarification on, or maybe the police chief. Thank you, Chief.
Mayor Sitman and members of the council, so that was removed from 7-25 and put in 7-27. Number 2 under 7-27, when unprovoked chases or approaches a person, including a person on a bike, upon the street, sidewalks, or any public or private property other than the owner's property in an apparent attitude of attack, and that's language out of the Fargo ordinance. So it's very similar to what was removed from 7-25. It's just the Fargo language for kind of the same type of behavior.
Does that affect the enforcement of the ordinance or the legal implications of it?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, I would echo what the chief said. I think it's pretty similar, and that would be satisfactory.
Alderman Padragula, did you have?
Okay, I'm satisfied with that. That raises the 2 other remaining issues for me in terms of fine-tuning it. One of them I brought up last time, and that was well, both of them I did, but one of them was the issue of defining more carefully or more precisely the section under 727 of apparent attitude of attack. And I wanted to suggest an amendment to that would be more specific and clarify that. I don't know what the current standing of the reasonable person standard is in animal cases. Maybe this will make it better. But what I wanted to add was to clarify that would include things like snarling, lunging, charging, chasing, or growling at someone. either way, whichever way we can enforce it. But I guess I thought there might be some value in clarifying what apparent attitude of attack means. Would there be any legal problems with that kind of a motion, or do you want to leave it vague?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Patrigula, I think that would be fine to do that if you're just using those terms as examples of
Right.
what that could mean. And I would leave that to the council's discretion.
The wording I would propose then would be after an apparent attitude of attack to insert parentheses and put, for example, comma, but not limited to snarling, lunging, charging, chasing, or growling, close parenthesis, period.
Is that in the form of amendment?
Yes.
Second.
Second by Alderman Walsky. Discussion on the amendment. Yes, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to get to split hairs here, but should it maybe define where that attitude of attack is? If someone's coming onto someone's property, should it be defined that it is to be on public property? If someone has a dog and someone comes into their house or approaches their house to sell something or to deliver something, and there's a dog present, I mean, I'm not an attorney. Maybe I would turn to the attorney in this case just to micromanage the ordinance might seem a bit excessive.
City Attorney Hendershot.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, the ordinance does indicate that it's on any public or private property other than the owner's property.
Okay.
So that's in the section.
Perfect.
So for clarification, that would exclude where the dog's home is.
Perfect.
That was actually my main concern as well, is where the description falls in for the guideline on that. Any further discussion on the amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Straight.
Mayor Sitma and Alderman Padragula, I think that I could spend the public's time for 30 minutes talking about other questions and concerns I have about this, but I think that the point is we're trying to start somewhere. And I think it's important for us, and I'll try to bring it up a year from now. I don't think it does any good to review it in 6 months, seeing that we're nearing the end of summer. But I think it's going to be important to review it again, mainly because the way I see this whole thing, it's all about enforcement and the public's ability to get the information from our city of what is acceptable and not. And as I took 3 or 4 phone calls the other day from neighbors of 15 and 17 years that have had issues with their neighbors, it's incumbent on all of us, obviously, to be good neighbors, first and foremost. We can't legislate that. We can't create that through ordinances. But the second side of it is we have to interact more with Chief Olson and our animal control officers. I'd encourage all of you to spend some time traveling around the city with them, and for us to gather some documentation as a starting point. These folks that reached out to me the last few days are incredibly frustrated that the documentation, and it's all very subjective, to Alderman Pittner's point, we all see it a little bit differently. What's snarling to one is pet-friendly behavior on the other, and it's hard to find the common area. I don't think we want to get too deep in the weeds. We don't want to spend too much time trying to legislate what makes a great pet owner, but we're trying to start somewhere. And we have to do a better job from the city standpoint of conveying what is acceptable animal behavior, pet behavior. The public needs to license their pets with the city of Minot. We could go into detail on a number of fronts, but I think it's going to be important to maybe review this in a year and then reassess. So I appreciate your questions, and there's a lot of gray that could be found in there, but I think we just need to start somewhere to answer those citizens that participated in that committee to move it forward. So I appreciate your questions, though. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Any further discussion on the amendment? Alderman Walsky.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. I think whenever we're writing policy, it's going to be helpful to be as clear as possible and attempt to find the areas where we may find opportunities to misinterpret or not deliver clarity. And so I appreciate Alderman Padragula's amendment because I think it's an improvement in the clarity.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion? Call the roll on the amendment.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Motion on the amendment passes back to the original motion for the dangerous dog ordinance. Alderman Padragula.
The second concern I had, well, there were, I guess, two other concerns. The second concern I had was the liability coverage that a dog owner might be required to provide. I'm in the healthcare business. I'm also in the legal business as a forensic psychologist, and I do personal injury work from time to time. And from my perspective, having $300,000 of malpractice for a dog, a dog doesn't do his job, of having $300,000 in liability insurance really is very little in the way of any protection. You know, if we have an animal that's really, really high risk, I don't think that that's going to make me feel comfortable owning potential victims. And as justification for that, I would cite the savage attack on two women, a girl and her mom in Mandan a couple of weeks ago. I reread the story, and the girl had over 100 stitches and is in a wheelchair. I don't think medical expenses are going to be, you're going to go very far with $300,000. So I guess what I would suggest is that we increase that to a higher amount, a minimum of $500,000, or the way professional malpractice insurance is covered is usually structured is in terms of per person and per incident. There might be a limit of $500,000 per person, but yet if several people are affected in the incident, it might be a higher one. A common way of referring to is 1 million, 3 million, or 500, 1 million, something like that. It just strikes me as not being sufficient protection for the public if we have a very severe attack, which we occasionally have, unfortunately. So I'd like to suggest that we increase that to, well, I guess I would ask the insurance people and the lawyer for their suggestion. I would suggest 500,000, $1 million.
Motion for increasing the liability limits from 300,000 to 500,000 / $1 million.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Attorney Hendershot.
And Mayor Sitma and members of the council, I just want to make sure that it's clear that these are not penalties or requirements that every dog owner that's charged with this type of violation will have to do. These are just options that the court can consider, and the court is not limited to only consider the options and the specific times or amounts that are limited or that are outlined in these options. So even though it says $300,000, the court, or $500,000, the court could go below that or above that and do whatever in its discretion it feels is appropriate. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that these are not actual obligations that would be required.
Thank you for that clarification. Any discussion on the motion? Alderman Janser.
Even with the clarification that the city attorney has made, I think that, you know, as we're writing this ordinance, it's important that, you know, we give an indication of how serious we believe that some of these matters can become. And as Alderman Padragula pointed out, you know, in sort of the worst case scenario, I think there needs to be clarity that enough insurance be in place. And certainly the court would do that at their discretion, but I think, you know, we sort of set the tone or set the bar by what's in the ordinance.
I would second those sentiments, Alderman Janser, that it's certainly probably language that was written a number of years ago, and I think the threshold, at least put forth by this body, even with the recommendations, stands on its merit. Alderman Straight.
Mayor Sitma, I guess I wanted to comment not exactly about the amount of insurance that could be recommended from the court, but the importance to the general public that if there's an animal issue in town and somebody is bit by a dog, it's important and incumbent that you call our city police and our animal enforcement officer, and that it's documented. I'll tell you the story that came out right after the discussion about the BSL ban was a resident that called me and was unbelievably upset with me, and rightly so, because their niece had died of a mauling in Alabama. And as a member of our community did a little research on the story as well, the woman had been attacked by a dog previously and didn't report it because she didn't want to cause any problems for the owner of the dog, only to be killed by the dog a few days later. And so as much as I look at our chief of police and our animal control officers to do the best they can, it's important that the public, again, follow the ordinances. And if you really care about kids and everybody involved, you have to report these things, and it has to be documented. And that's the best strategy that we can have of trying to protect the public. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted that to be known.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion on the amendment? Call the roll on the amendment for increasing the liability limit.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Back to the amended twice motion. Anything further? Alderman Padragula.
Thank you, no.
Any further discussion on the amended motion? Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Motion passes. Number 12 for the Committee of the Whole from August 1st is the modification to Phase MI1, the Mouse River Flood Protection Paths and Openings. Do I have a motion? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, I'm going to move the item with one small change, that we approve the opening as discussed at Committee of the Whole, but change the funding source to sales tax capital infrastructure.
We have a motion from Alderman Wolski.
Second.
Second from Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. I'll just briefly provide a little bit of information on here. I had received a phone call as well from some concerned folks that were a little bit, well, they were a little bit concerned that we were using sales tax dollars that were dedicated towards flood control for improvements that were seen as outside of flood control. So at this point, thank you, Alderman Wolski, for making the motion, and we will continue having those conversations down the road. So I think that some other folks can, I think, get a full understanding that we are funding our full half penny and above from what our obligation is for flood control at this time, and will continue to. So thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman Olson.
Again, tonight I will be voting in opposition, but I want to clarify a statement that I made last week during the Committee of the Whole. Part of my opposition is related to the Ann Street Bridge, and I referenced the integrity of the bridge, and I want to clarify saying that's my opinion. That is not an engineer's recommendation. I am not an engineer. That is just my personal feeling regarding to the bridge, and so the bridge may be in wonderful tact. I don't know that. I just don't like it.
Thank you for that clarification there, Alderman Olson. Alderman Padragula.
Just to thank Alderman Wolski for making that change in funding source. I think it clarifies, as let's say Water Commission has been having us do, what the money exactly is used for. I have mixed feelings about the putting the gateway there. I've mentioned previously I'm very concerned about the reliability of those flood control structures, the stop walls, and particularly about how they would be deployed in the case of an emergency. However, we need to keep neighborhoods intact. And Ann Street Bridge or no Ann Street Bridge, I think would be useful to allow greater access to the river. We're trying to see the river as an asset rather than a threat. So I think if we shift the funding to clarify that, to make people happier about what the money's being used for, I think that's a good change. I don't think that I'll be able to support any more holes in the wall at this point, however. This is the last one as far as I'm concerned, unless there's some extremely unusual or persuasive circumstance or argument. I am very concerned that we have, 22, 23 temporary openings or permanent openings, hopefully, to fill up temporarily in the case of a flood. And, I can balance that, I can offset that by neighborhood integrity and access to hopefully will be a beautiful set of recreational activities by the river. But I think for me, this will be the last one. I'm just too worried about closing them. I also like the idea of, again, Ann Street Bridge or no Ann Street Bridge, allowing more access to the river and seeing it as a resource, encouraging people to move freely. It is only, 3 blocks or something, but I think psychologically when I walk that, when I look that on the map, that's a long ways. And anything we can do to kind of connect that neighborhood, keep it connected with downtown, I'm comfortable with. And I also, the big thing too I wanted to mention was Josh's suggestion of narrowing some of the other openings, the ones by Broadway, to give us the same net amount of opening in the walls. I think that's a very good compromise, a very reasonable compromise. So having said that, I'm going to support this motion. But again, I think this will be the last one I'll be able to support in terms of extra holes in walls.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. I've had a busy 6 weeks, and I know all of you have as well, but I'm going to find a date towards the end of August, and I'm going to invite as many of you as you'd like to take a day and go with me and hopefully city staff, and if Jill wants to come, and let's take a tour of Grand Forks and go there. If you haven't laid eyes on it, post-flood, I was a student at the University of North Dakota. I lived through that flood as well as I lived through the 2011 flood. The community came back, I think, stronger than ever. I think our community is as well. And the one thing I feel that's needed more than ever to prove that we are a more resilient community is that we have to balance the quality of life that our increasingly younger population here in the city of Minot is wanting and desiring to remain here with the protection of flood, the power of the river. And so I want to find a time to take folks there and city staff, particularly Mr. Barry, Mr. Lakefield, to look at what happened in that community, in neighborhoods that were lost, with how they've come back, because I think it would help us better understand. And I appreciate Alderman Padragula. We have to be stewards of taxpayer dollars, but we always have to find a balance to maintain kind of our own sanity. And so you know that better than most, sir. So I would hope that moving forward, if we have to have discussions about more openings or less openings, that we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yes, City Manager Barry.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to respond quickly to Alderman Straight's recommendation. I think that's a fantastic idea, and I might just encourage that we do that during the North Dakota League of Cities Conference in Grand Forks this next month. It's, again, remember, I think it's scheduled about the 13th or so of the month, so that could be a nice opportunity for us all to partake in that.
Alderman Padragula.
I just wanted to clarify too, and I said no more openings other than those that are designed by the engineers for free movement of people, nothing in the sense of a recreational or river-oriented kind of opening.
You hate to ever assume anything, but
that's why I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Didn't assume any more openings, period. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Just to kind of touch on a couple things that I've heard tonight, because I think as Mr. Ackerman pointed out rightly so last week in this discussion, we want to be careful in the manner in which we're discussing this, that we maintain to the public that these closure structures, these temporary closure structures, they are safe. They are built to the same standards in terms of withholding forces that the concrete walls are built to. It really is the matter of getting to them and getting them put in place in the case of the need to put our flood protection system in action. With regards to the Ann Street opening, I'm going to continue to support it, and I think it's an opportunity for us as a council and as a community to make sure we're paying close attention to this process, because this has been a whole lot of work and extra rigmarole to get this opening in place. And I think if we're a little careful and more diligent in the design process, then we'll catch these things and we'll make sure that we've got the interests of the citizens in the neighborhoods and the manner in which people want to move around Minot at hand as we place these next ones. So.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
No.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Motion passes. That takes us to number 12, ordinances on second reading.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move approval.
Alderman Janser, approval on 1 through 4.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? For anyone in the audience or maybe that is watching on TV, the rezoned Greenland 3rd edition, also the amendment to the 2018 budget for the auditorium lighting upgrade, the amendment to the 2018 budget, the library chiller coil replacement, and also the handicap accessible parking space on First Avenue Southeast. If no further discussion, please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion passes. And that takes us to administrative approvals. And we have a number of them on our screen.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson.
Second?
Second by Alderman Janser. Any discussion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes,
Janser.
Yes.
motion passes. And that takes us to other business. And first on our other business, we have a resolution establishing a committee to research the merging of the City of Minot and Ward County Library Services. And this is a resolution that came to us, I believe, from Ward County itself, a similar resolution rather, to add a couple of members, if I'm not mistaken there. Alderman Olson.
Yes. Move approval on this.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on the motion? Yes, Alderman Padragula.
Thank you. I like the idea of expressing our policy intent to try to work something out to merge these two. And I note that the county commissioners in their proposed resolution specify that there are two or three, or actually three reasons for doing this. To me, the cost saving is significant, but to me, as important, if not more important, is the idea of providing higher quality services, of being more responsive to people's needs. And I don't think having two facilities, 8 blocks away from each other does that. Yeah, I think we can save some money, but I think we need to look at it from the users, the consumers, the residents' standpoint. And if you have a single, stronger, better entity, I think that's worth it. I think we'll save some money, probably not a whole lot. But I think it's the principle of making things more transparent, more easy to use from the citizen's standpoint. So that's the main attraction to me.
Thank you, Alderman Padragula. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you, and I appreciate the clarification in this resolution as well. I think it's important for everybody to maybe keep in mind some of the domino effect benefits we might see in the future that we haven't quite yet imagined too. If for instance, the space in the Ward County Administration Building were no longer needed for the library there, and we were able to consolidate into our the city's existing building, now we have a space availability. And for an operation maybe like our central dispatch, if things start shuffling a little bit, maybe the city hall pressure and the space here, there might start to be opportunities that we haven't yet imagined for additional savings that maybe aren't directly related to library operations, but are to our overall government operations that are worth keeping an eye out for. So I just wanted to share that thought.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Olson.
Just for anyone that would be listening, we don't want to make any assumptions when we talk about two libraries 8 blocks apart. The Ward County Library is serving Ward County, and particularly the county library in Kenmare and the Bookmobile. So we don't want to, ruffle any feathers and concern anyone outside of Minot that we would be discontinuing any library services. That would not be part of the conversation.
Thank you for that clarification, Alderman Olson. Alderman Patergula.
I'm very well aware of that, and I certainly don't want to reduce services. For the record, though, the Minot City Library provides free services to the residents of Ward County, and I think 2 or 3 other counties, which I was a little bit surprised to learn we were that magnanimous and gracious. So no, it's certainly not a matter of restricting or cutting back. And, you know, I've spoken before, and I'll speak again as to the importance of supporting people in our rural communities. Maybe if we could use that bookmobile, you know, for congregate housing facilities in the city. Certainly, we can't cut anything off for people who live in the rural areas. You know, again, I see the quality, the access improving for everybody within Ward County.
Alderman Wolski.
One more thought to add to that, because I do appreciate Alderman Patergula's thoughts that we have been extending our services out to individuals in the county. And it's not, that's not always the standard circumstance. I've lived in other places where services like libraries, where service like municipal golf courses or park district-owned golf courses had rates that were one way for a resident within the jurisdiction and a rate that was different for another patron in a different jurisdiction. And so I think it is important to note that the city of Minot and through our park district as well has been gracious hosts to our more rural neighbors.
I think that falls under the North Dakota Nice Resolution, if I'm not mistaken. Alderman Olson.
And I'm going to call on Janet if I'm saying this wrong, but I think that part of the reason that we are able to provide those services is that we do get funding from the state library. So that is part of the reason that we can extend our services out into a multi-county region.
Thank you for that clarification as well. Any further discussion on the motion? Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion passes. Goes to 14.2, the 2019 Annual Pay and Classification Plan.
Mr. Mayor, I move we receive and file the report.
Motion by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the classification, 2019 Annual Pay and Classification Plan? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion passes. This takes us to 14.3, the resolution number 3582, the CWSRF, and then the DWSRF applications.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion? We can see the information on our screen, and I see our City Finance Director coming forward.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is just a little bit of housekeeping. This item was brought in front of this body in January. We haven't started drawing down on this financing, haven't closed on this financing. With the change with the new mayor, the state just wants updated documents with the new mayor's name on it. So I just want to bring it back for updating.
Make sure we get the name or the right signature on the right name line.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion passes. 14, number 5, the 2019 Domestic Violence Crisis Center, JAG. This is PD 0154. I'm sorry, PD 010153. It's different on the online one. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Can we have a verification on the 0153 or is it 0154? Just for our records. I think it's 0154. I think it's just different on here, on our screen.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Yep, item number 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm really jumping ahead of myself then, in other words, what you're saying. Trying to get to the end, folks. So the 2019 lottery grant application, Jag, this is PD 0153. Thank you.
That was my motion.
That was your motion, Mr.
Yep.
Janser. Was that the second, Alderman Pittner?
Yes.
Thank you. Now that we've got that straightened away, do we have any discussion on it? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Now we can go to number 5. The Domestic Violence Crisis Center, Jake PD 0154.
Move approval.
Move approval by Alderman Olson,
Second.
second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion passes. And finally, under other business, an item that I think somehow was left off our agenda. But there was a big packet that was put in front of everyone's desk today, and by no means underestimates its importance to us tonight. It is the 2019 proposed annual budget. To that, I would look to our city manager.
Good evening once again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. In accordance with the state statutes, I am to provide you a preliminary budget this evening to make our deadlines regarding the requirements for budget development. There's no action required this evening by you. I'm simply here to present the budget. And I thought it'd be a nice opportunity with that to present some background information or some context as we develop the budget, kind of going into what we had evaluated at what the budget means to folks in our community and so on and so forth. So with that, as you know, we have been working on the budget for some time, at least back to almost February of this year. And that kind of is our cycle. It starts to ramp up, and essentially this last month and a half or two is pretty busy on us and the staff. Essentially, here we are in the budget timeline, August 6th, where the preliminary budget is presented to you. Looking ahead, we have the question and answer session, which will be the first committee of the whole meeting of this month, and that will be at 4:15 in auditorium room 201 on August the 28th. The President's budget message will be due on September 4th. The first public hearing and reading of the budget will occur on September 18th, and then we hope to finalize the budget by the City Council's second reading on September the 25th, just so that we kind of know what's ahead of us moving forward. This budget was put together with 15 budget principles that the City Council developed along with myself and the directors of the city. They're here for just a reminder for you and also maybe as an introduction to the community. The City Council was very deliberate in providing direction to the staff on how to develop this year's budget. And these were some lofty goals that I and the staff were held accountable to meeting. And I can assure you that we have done just that with the presentation of this budget. We've also included our ability to financially model now, something that this city has not done in at least as long as staff can remember. We're able to see out now 5 years, a sort of view into the future of what our funding needs and challenges are so that we can begin to make modifications and adjustments sooner to prevent massive adjustments, being required at a much later date. It has been sobering work, as is often the case when you first start this work, but it has been very informational and has allowed us to make many of the recommendations which are included in your budget for your consideration this year. To give you an overall budget summary, the FY 2019 total budget is about $180 million. It's up $37 million from the FY 18 budget, which at first glance might alarm many in our community. So I thought I might go into why that is. First of all, most of the costs that are attributed to that difference are associated with money that we have saved up and are now spending on the Northwest Area Water Supply Project. Second of all, we'll be adding an additional $4.9 million for flood control projects throughout fiscal year 19. and that's above and beyond what we've spent this year or will be spent this year. Flood control property acquisitions, to continue the buyout program, will be to the tune of about $10.5 million. And general fund increases of about $4.6 million, which a lot of folks might confuse with staff or overhead, is actually not at all going to that. It's instead going to the SWIFT levy work for levy improvements and for the acquisition of a citywide system software solution, which we have been desperately needing for many years, as you've heard recently from us and the staff about. I wanted to talk about some budget observations quickly here. Fiscal year 2019 has been driven on a revenue standpoint from two primary components. One, depressed sales tax revenues, which continue to this day, and property valuation reductions. These two revenue drivers have created a situation where the costs have remained the same essentially for the city, but revenues continue to decline. We've gone through this conversation many times with you over the past several months, and that trend continues based upon the modeling projections that we can see. I can say that it looks like property valuations may begin to stabilize here. At least that's the preliminary information we're having. But a depressed sales tax revenue is going to be something that we're going to have to contend with going into the future. On the expense side, we have two very, very large projects that we will be dealing with for some time to come. The Northwest Area Water Supply Project, because that's now out of court litigation, will be moving forward, requires us to rededicate revenues to that particular project. And of course, flood control, which we are right on the brink in constructing, is going to continue to require additional revenues as well going forward. So those are things that we have to gear up for and continue to be aware of as we move forward in subsequent budgets. Just wanted to point out, mostly for the folks at home, because I know you on the City Council have seen this many times, this is what sales tax collections have looked like at least over the last couple of years. We expect that this will stabilize in fiscal year 2019. We've been monitoring this. We haven't seen it necessarily continue to drop through 18, but it's more or less flat at this point in time. There is a slight possibility it could increase, and I'll talk about that here near the end of the presentation, but at this point in time, this budget contemplates flat sales tax collections in 2017. I want to point out on this graph what's particularly important is you see that last section there on the right of the screen where it says a $7.2 million drop. If sales taxes remain flat like this each year hereafter, that's an additional $7.2 million of revenue that the city does not collect. And that's a problem kind of going forward. You'll see, as I've mentioned, because we've placed a lot of our levy activities or otherwise property tax activities into sales taxes, we need to make that shift back. We've talked about that many times. You'll see that here. Just in the last 3 years alone, we've lost $14.6 million because of those sales tax losses from a revenue standpoint. And to put that in perspective again, our entire property tax collection in FY17 was $17.9 million. So almost 3 years of sales tax reductions has essentially wiped out 1 full year of property tax reductions compared to FY17. We do expect to see a continued reduction in property valuations in this budget. We essentially have identified a 2% residential valuation decline and about a 5% commercial valuation decline. Because we have about 40% of our properties that are commercial and about the remainder in residential. When you combine those, we see about a 3% total decline in property valuations. That has to be made up in the rate. As you know, valuations impact rate based upon the dollars needed for this to cover the city's budget. So the rate impact is essentially 3.37 mils. We'll talk a little bit about how that impacts our citizens in just a moment, but I wanted you to track with me at least on how that was computed. The Northwest Area Water Supply Project has historically been financed through our second penny up until about 2011. Once that project became entangled or embroiled in litigation, the city councils of the past had decided to create a separate community grant program, and that money was dedicated towards that grant program in addition to other things. And so we stopped collecting revenue as a city for the Northwest Area Water Supply Project and used that revenue for other things. It is now time to restore the revenue that's required to the Northwest Area Water Supply Project and therefore make adjustments to the other uses of the revenues. And our recommendation is as follows. We believe, based on our modeling, that we can support the continued completion, the continued work and completion of the Northwest Area Water Supply Project for about 40% of that second penny. Now, according to our ordinance that's been established, in order for us to squeeze 40% more out of that second penny, we have to reduce proportionately the other three components of that second penny. So you'll notice that tax relief, which is a direct property tax buy down, will go down 12% from 30 to 18%. Our community facilities or flood control financing, or funding rather, will go from 30% down to 18%, which is another loss of 12%. And infrastructure used for, say, streets, sidewalks, other municipal infrastructure will need to be reduced by 16% from 40% to 24%. These numbers are all predicated on a revenue projection that suggests 1 penny of sales tax will equal $10 million worth of revenue for the city. So I wanted to convert what this means in regards to property taxes because in order to make up that revenue, we have to pull it from some other source. Here's how it works. The recommendation is to shift those property tax activities from sales taxes back into property revenue or property tax revenue sources. So here's what it looks like. The tax relief, that 12% based on $10 million of projected revenue per penny, means that we have to make up $1.2 million if we want to continue property tax relief. Now, of course, it doesn't make sense to shift that back into property taxes, right? Because you're not really doing anything. So what we're essentially saying here is that the property tax relief essentially will go down 12%. That's what essentially that means. Community facilities or flood control will need to make up $1.2 million, and the 16% of the infrastructure will be about another $1.6 million, which gets at 40%, or essentially $40 million that has to be made up in that second penny in order for us to make room for that 40% needed to cover the NOS project.
Just one correction there. You had said 40 million, 4 million instead of 40.
My apologies. It's the head cold. I apologize about that. 4.0 million, or yes, thank you for that. That would be very bad. All right, so here's how it works out. That 4 million equals about 19.43 mils of property tax. So here's essentially what's gone on in our past. Since 2006, sales taxes, which is the darker of the two lines, has increased over time. And the city council of the past has decided to reduce property taxes. Between 11 and 12, there was a major shift, and a lot of levy activities were shifted toward, property tax activities were shifted toward sales taxes. And sales taxes made up essentially the dominant funding source for a lot of those property tax activities. That works well as long as that model continues. As of course you know, and I've presented that many times to you, since 2014 sales taxes have continued to reduce, and that reduction in sales taxes requires us to make up that funding difference. This is where a lot of people in our community get confused because they think we're raising property taxes just to raise property taxes, but the reality is we shifted from property taxes as a reliant source of revenues, a good portion, to sales taxes. And now we have to shift back. It's not a matter of reducing budgets and eliminating programs and services. It's a matter of what was the revenue source that we used. We moved from property taxes to sales taxes. Now the lines have crossed. Sales taxes are no longer there. We have to move those sales tax property activities back into property taxes. So this is what happened, as I mentioned. We shifted levy costs into sales taxes, essentially in 2011 and 12. Now we have to shift them back to property taxes. It's essentially that simple. And we're doing this because we have to make room for the NOS project, that 40% that I mentioned to you. If we didn't have to essentially finance that this year, we probably wouldn't have to have much of a discussion about changes in the budget. So here's how it comes out in regard to mill impacts. I had mentioned 19.43 mills would be needed for NAWS. An additional 3.37 mills is needed to adjust for the rate because of the valuation decline. But for the most part, that should be a net zero change for all property owners who either were flat in their valuations or actually saw a reduction in their property valuations. So this is the budgeted mill levy recommendation, adding 22.8 mills to the fiscal year mill levy amount of 106.46, which would lead us to 129.26 mills. That puts us almost in the ballpark with what our levy rate used to be back in around 2005 or so, 2005 or 6, if I remember correct. To put that in perspective, one thing we heard from the Citizens Focus Group that we held not too long ago was, give us dollars, don't give us mills. It's too hard to understand. What that means is essentially we would need to request $162 more per year for the median home valued price in Minot in order to balance this budget. That's essentially $13.50 more on that median valued home for the city of Minot. Now, how that relates to other organizations, as best we can tell right now, because they're still modifying their budgets as well, but as best we can tell, essentially, Park District will be flat. Ward County's already published this budget to an increase of about 1.3%. Our increase is tantamount to about 18.5% in our city portion, which, keep in mind, is less than a third of the entire total consolidated tax amount. And then Minot Public Schools looks to be maybe around flat or so. That means that when you add all of this together, the entire total consolidated tax increase for our citizens is going to be roughly around 6%. Significant on our portion, maybe not quite as significant over the total tax, consolidated tax burden. I wanted to note that last year stung particularly hard for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was a big increase that the city needed because we had to recognize that we couldn't continue to survive off of reserves any longer. Second of all, we had to address the declining sales tax revenues. And third of all, we had the state pull out of its 12% buy down last year. So that 12% reduction was eliminated and acted as a double whammy onto the citizens. That will not happen this year since it's already been addressed last year. And in addition, the increase this year being recommended is smaller as well. So we do hope that that will have a more favorable impact, all things considered, as it relates to the moving forward of this budget. On utility rates, we're not proposing any rate changes to water, to stormwater, or to sanitation. We are proposing about a $3.16 per month increase, which is a little less than 3% for the sewer. This is based upon large sewer projects that are mounting, in addition to some expansion sewer projects in the southwest area of Minot, so we expect that area to grow. I would be remiss to not take the opportunity to remind the City Council, but maybe introduce to our community, that we have been very diligent as a staff in trying to remain efficient in the delivery of our services while maintaining the quality of those services to our citizens. Not many people in our community know this, but essentially there have been numerous efficiencies, cost avoidance strategies, and otherwise good works of our department heads and finance staff that have offset major budget pressures on past budgets and including this budget. They include many of the things that you see on the screen here, certainly not all of them, but things like procuring, millions of dollars in grants. This city does a tremendous job in securing grants, in leveraging money from others to do the good work of our community. In fact, grants and donations are the single largest revenue source for the city of Minot. It's an absolute feat. Retiring high-interest debt sooner, deferring projects, conducting more work in-house, being more lean as a staff, salvaging parts from vehicles and other equipment to use them on other vehicles and equipment that prevents us from having to buy new. There's all sorts of different efficiencies that our leaders in our community and our staff have undertaken to the tune. When I asked them to quantify it, we worked with the finance department to make it legit. $78 million just in the last 4 years alone has been saved in our community from the valiant efforts of our department heads and our staff. And I couldn't be more proud to say that. I don't know of a city, at least that I've been aware of or worked for or whatnot, that can say that. This is absolutely impressive. So I think that should be highly recognized for our staff. Additionally, we didn't just stop on those, you know, we continued to look and hunt and peck for everything else we could find. We did cut $700,000 from the operations budget this year. Again, remember last year we cut $5 million, so we've cut another $700 this year. It's getting harder to find that. And at the direction of the leadership of the City Council, we were asked to go and talk with many of the organizations we have historically financed in the form of grants and donations ourselves, and we've had to pull back on some of those to the tune of about $570,000. Those two efforts alone, separate and aside from the efficiencies I just talked about, also reduced our budget by $1.3 million, or reduced the need for raising the budget another $6.5 million. So I stand before you this afternoon to say that we have continued to be as lean and as efficient as we can. It has been difficult, but we know it's important, and it's something that our staff take absolutely seriously each and every day. Do we make mistakes sometimes? Yes, we do. That's just the nature of working fast and furious in a very stressful environment sometimes with limited resources. I mean, that'll happen. But I can tell you I'm very proud of the team for all their efforts and what they've done in helping to pull this budget together, and for the efficiencies and cost avoidance strategies that we've been able to pursue. A couple future considerations for you, and then I'll let you jump into the budget books. The NOS sales tax adjustment should be sufficient for us. We don't imagine that next year we're going to have to ask for more. We think that 40% will set us up to be able to finish out the project. Now, that's based on the information we know today. That could change if we get a revised estimate, if we get other components to the project that need to be built, if there's a different share contribution or less interest from the federal government or the state or whatnot. Those are all subject to change, but at this point, with the information we know, we should be fine on NOS. However, flood control will continue to be a challenge for us going forward. I've mentioned this several times to you. Also, I mentioned it to the Source River Joint Board and others. While it is absolutely a critical component of our work as a community, continuing to find money to pull these projects together in the way that they've been envisioned is going to be a tall order for us for the foreseeable future. However, the funding that's been recommended in this budget takes care of next year and also sets us up for future years as well. The Northwest Fire Station number 5 is not included in this budget, nor is the City Hall building included in the budget. Those were the wishes of the City Council to postpone those projects, so we have done that. And just as a reminder, streets maintenance, although we are making a bit more of an improvement there, there's still a sizable backlog and remains a concern for us in future budgets. Wanted to just look ahead at a couple things that as we try to broaden our view down the road further, we do see the economy starting to improve. We've heard that, we've seen the numbers, that's good news. We also know that ag and oil prices are on the rise, and so is oil activity out west. Property valuations appear to have stabilized. Projection modeling suggests that this should be the last major adjustment to property taxes, provided that we can address flood control with some alternative funding source. And as you know, some of that's being discussed already. The Hub City formula changes could bring in about $2.5 million more per year. We won't know that really till the end of next year or so, after the legislature does its thing early on. Consolidations of services, we talked about the parks, potential parks district and city recreation merger, as well as the 2 libraries. That may save us money. It might even save the other jurisdictions money as well, and therefore all of our taxpayers. Online sales tax collections, with the recent Supreme Court ruling, may bring in significant revenues on sales taxes. That may also help us in the future. The federal government's interest in the Phase 4 of flood control, provided we can retain that, will be significant as well. And lastly, the state legislature is working on lower interest infrastructure loans. That would be significant for us too, because our modeling right now does not include that lower interest financing, and that does change things for us going forward. So next steps, as I leave you with the budget, please review the information that was presented to you in the 3 budget workshops that we held last month. Review the fiscal 19 budget book, the one that's being delivered. Has it been delivered yet? Do you have it yet? Okay, perfect. And then generate your list of questions. We know you'll have lots of questions. Encourage you to develop a long list of questions. Meet with me or department heads in advance to get some of the simple or basic questions addressed. There is limited time at the committee of the whole meeting to have every single small question addressed. We're available right now from here through the rest of the budget process. So if you have small, easy to get questions, inquiries or whatnot, please don't hesitate. Don't wait for the Q&A. But if you think it's something that everybody needs to know about, including the community or your other aldermen or whatnot, by all means, bring it to the Q&A. We'll address it. I ask that you don't surprise the staff. Of course, nobody likes that. We'll be better prepared the more you help to prepare us. So if you can tell us, hey, we're going to ask you a question on this, or I've got this concern, or what's this all about, or whatnot, we can do that digging, we can find the research, we can get the answers, and we can present it to you, because after the Q&A, there isn't going to be a whole lot of opportunity for additional conversation about the budget unless you direct us to hold another Q&A, for example, at some point in time. So please come prepared. Please ask as many questions in advance, and please get us your questions in advance so that we can prepare as well. Lastly, the Q&A will be held in Auditorium Room 201 on August 28th. It's a Tuesday at 4:15. And this will be essentially your opportunity to work one-on-one with all the department heads and myself and the finance staff to get into all the nitty-gritty of the budget. So you don't have to have questions this evening, but I'll stand for any questions you might have. There's quite a bit of information in the budget book, and look forward to your feedback on that when you get an opportunity.
City Manager Barry, I first want to lead off at least with some comments. First and foremost, I want to commend you and the rest of the staff that have put an amazing amount of hours into this, and not only just developing the budget, but in the amount of time that you've spent with leadership in developing the principles. I can safely say without a shadow of a doubt, this is probably the best prepared in terms of fiscal budgeting and visioning that the leadership body, the elected leadership body, has ever had within the city in terms of getting together with staff and understanding what the elected body foresees as priorities, and then helping us understand the short-term and long-term repercussions of decisions of the past, the current, and what our future needs are going to be with projected costs. So that was no short order of trying to gather that information and put it into an understandable format for a lot of us. So it's a very difficult budget, and it's very difficult to sit here and even look at the base principles of what's before us for a second year. But I do fully understand what went into it, and can look into the 5-year budgeting process and see that we're on the right track now. We'll definitely dig into this and have those questions ready. But first and foremost, to you and to the rest of the staff, outstanding work in getting these numbers put together and putting the information together in a very concise, understandable format. And lastly, this one is going out to, I think, the rest of everyone that is in the city of Minot. We've looked at the cost of convenience, and this isn't a platform by any means, but I think it's more of a community soapbox. When we take a look at our sales tax numbers and the size of our city and compare it to a time when we were much smaller and still generating more revenue, the online sales significantly impacts us each and every day with our own property tax. And I know I'm speaking to the choir within this room, but I'm hoping that it's reaching a larger audience with the cameras that the cost of convenience is our property tax. We chose a number of years ago that we were going to subsidize our own property tax through sales tax. And every time the parcel delivery shows up on our door from dollars that are headed out of state, those are dollars that are gone forever, and certainly have impacted us for the last couple of years and will again this year. So it is my push to the general public. Understandably, not everything can always be bought locally, but buying Minot first makes a difference. Other questions or comments from the council? Alderman Padragula.
I wanted to echo your remarks, particularly in terms of complimenting city staff, the city manager, the finance director, and their staffs. This is my 11th budget. I think it's more equal to any number of budgets anyone on this council has had. But I think more importantly, my perspective is more historical. My first budget was in 1998. And I can appreciate the tremendous changes, the tremendous improvements that you and your staff have made. I think this council is much better prepared, and so is the public, for understanding the budget, where it's coming from, what the key issues are, and the tremendous efforts that have been made to keep services reasonable. I frankly would like to see improvement in the quality, not necessarily the quantity, but quality of services. But I want to assure people that the whole community is as well prepared as we can be, certainly better than, in my opinion, we ever have been for receiving a budget and continuing the conversation that's been started many months ago with the budget workshops. So I wanted to thank you and your staff really in the strongest possible terms. This is really an exemplary process. I don't know what will happen, but I think we're getting a start on it as best as we can, and that's really noticed and really appreciated.
Thank you.
Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Mr. Barry, I echoed all of the previous comments. I greatly appreciate the hard work that has gone into putting this together. It's difficult to look at in terms of the increase, but throughout those budget preparation and workshops, that's what we asked for. We asked for the full picture of what our obligations are and the investments that we really have to make to keep the operation just keeping pace with the changes in the world. I have one kind of brief procedural question here. Why have we chosen the municipal auditorium for the Q&A? I wonder, with the new investment that's been made and the cameras and the systems in here, if this might not be a better forum. I'm just curious behind the logic behind that.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, that's a great question. Essentially, the attempt is to do this: provide a much larger space for more people to attend. And it's hard to believe that there may be more than this room can hold, but I've seen that happen. In addition, it's an opportunity for us to have all of our department directors sit at a table with you on a one-on-one basis and have a more free exchange of information in a more efficient manner than to have one director come one at a time to answer each and every one of your questions. If it's your desire, however, to hold that particular meeting in this room, we can certainly accommodate that. There are some logistical issues in holding it in another room, particularly the cameras, for example, and sometimes the audio, although we have that worked out for this year. But that was essentially the thinking. And if it's your desire to have it here and you'd be more comfortable in this room, we can certainly accommodate you that way.
Okay.
Yes, Alderman Walski.
Kind of a final comment here, and this is, I would say, much more for my fellow aldermen and Mayor Sitma and really the rest of the community. I think this is far beyond the scope of staff. You guys have taken the direction we've given you, and I think you've delivered what we asked for at this point. But I think the larger challenge for us as a community is looking inside our sales tax spending in those particular buckets and looking at the way we've been using those property tax buy-downs. And I think one of the practices or one of the questions we're going to have to face is whether that has been a benefit to us, frankly, because I think there may be a systemic flaw in that policy overall. And I think we witnessed the state attempt to do that for a couple of years. I think we saw them in the last legislative session get away from that practice because it really isn't a reduction in property tax. It's really just a shell game and where we are getting our revenue from in terms of spending. And so I think the larger question always comes to the spending and the transparency that comes with funding our needs with a revenue source that is easy to understand for the taxpayers. And sales tax does a pretty good job of obscuring that, I think, when we use these buy downs in this manner. So that's a conversation I think we're all going to need to have over the next, this month, and I think long into the future, in terms of how do we get ourselves onto just a better path in terms of our spending and revenue and making it transparent and easy to understand. So.
Any further comments or questions for City Manager this time? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sidma. Mr. Berry, I thank you for your work, the staff's work. The one question that I'll be the enemy maybe at the start is the public. Many people in the public have reached out to me, and they appreciate the modeling. They appreciate the staff diving into the historical, how we got here, where we're heading. The public would like to hear one time how in some fashion we could cut something. And I know you and I have talked about this a great deal. We've talked about the stress on staff, bulging at the seams in this particular building. But the public sees another possible property tax increase on the horizon, and they are going to read it in the paper tomorrow, and they are going to call us. And they're going to say, Shannon, here you are again. You're not, this is ridiculous. And so I just want to put that out there. And I know it's difficult to say we can't do any more, Alderman Straight, we can't decrease more, but the public would like to see it in some fashion. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I feel like I maybe got off to a bad start last year by talking about the pay plan. I think many of us would like to redo that whole conversation. But as I look at the figures of, we hired 416 employees and we've lost quite a few, you know, I can own the fact of what's happened over the last year and the role I played in that. I feel bad about it. I met with our police chief 2 weeks ago. But the public does want to hear that. You know, we've slowed some projects. I think they need to hear the specifics of what it would look like, how it would affect services. I appreciate knowing that we're not trying to raise rates on a whole host of fees. But that is one thing that I'm mindful of, because my phone rings like all of my colleagues up here. And that is the one little vignette that will be taken out of tonight. And the other thing I heard of our last liaison committee meeting is let's please reach out to the other political subdivisions and let them know where we're at, where we're heading, because I know that you and I, Tom, have been in other meetings where we have taken the brunt of criticism, and I think the more we can get out in front of that, knowing that we're going to have a lot of heated conversation and discussion and the questions are all good and relevant, the more we can do that right now, I think is going to help also provide that greater context that the public oftentimes doesn't catch. So those are my two thoughts.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
One of the hardest parts, I think, with this is trying to convey with a lot of folks that just maintaining basic services is where we're at right now, and even stretching ourselves to do that as a city. And looking at how much we've grown as a city and how little we've grown in terms of City Hall, I think is a testament to that. And it's never easy. Shannon and many others that are still double mortgaged up from 2011 to sit here and say $13, $14, $15 a month with the utility bills, at least with the projected. But one thing that we've also been tasked with as a leadership body is providing basic services. And certainly the questions will come in the next couple of meetings, and I think we can help convey some of those questions from the public to the city staff and get those answers. Any further comments or questions? Yes, Alderman Janser.
Mayor Sitman, thank you. I just want to foot stomp the piece that was in the presentation about digging into this budget soon. Those of us here, you know, that Q&A meeting will creep up on us very quickly. And so budget your time, get into the book, come up with your questions, and make sure that we're ready when that meeting arrives.
Thank you, Alderman Janser, absolutely. Any further questions for City Manager Berry? Oh, yes, Alderman.
I'll just make a comment. It's the best budget I've ever seen, but this is my first one, so that's pretty easy to do. Getting into this is a lot of information, I think, for citizens to understand that this is a very trying time. This is a course correction that the city is taking from kicking the proverbial can down the road for many years. So this isn't the city doubling down on anything. This isn't the city like we said, providing anything above basic services and essential services. So, like I say, I encourage, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't got a lot of phone calls yet, and that's part of something that I encourage. So if you don't have my phone number to anybody who's out in Facebook or out in the media, it's 701-500-3500. I encourage you to reach out to me or any other alderman with questions, because I would love to educate on how we got here, because that is the root of the problem, is how we got here and what we're doing to fix it in this perfect storm of NAWS and flood control. And I encourage, and I don't know if I said thank you for the budget and for the assets and the tools you provide. You do a fantastic job. And I think we as a city need to understand that being efficient costs dollars. Working smart isn't free. We've worked hard in this community for a very long time, and I think we've just said we can do it. We can cut this or we can cut that, and the reality is we can't anymore. We're down to the bare bones, and that's my opinion, I guess, and I think a lot of people would share that in our budget. I'd like to see us, and I think, and this is, again, my opinion, I think investing in flood protection is an important thing for our community. It's an asset for our community, but it can't be the only thing we invest in our community. And I encourage us as a council to be very cognizant of that, and our city staff. You will have my vote of confidence to bring any ideas to the table when it comes to making our city more efficient and making our city more competitive in any way, shape, or form. So again, thank you to you and the staff. It's not a position I envy, being asked to do what you guys do. And just to piggyback, again, to reiterate something that Mr. Wolski said, and I'll kind of back him, and I'll take it a step further. This budget isn't keeping pace with anything. It's catching up, because we're behind the 8 ball. We've fallen behind. And like I said, this is a course correction that needs to happen, and I'm excited to be a part of it. This is why I got involved, and I know why everyone else got involved, is because we want to be a part of what our community has to offer and be a part of growing it. So.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. Any further comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I have just maybe one or two comments. I want to thank you, the City Council, for your courage and your support and all along the way here. This is not an easy job for you, and you will bear the brunt of this budget. We know that. You have the hard work now. And we had to struggle ourselves internally trying to put this thing together, but now you guys will have the really tough work figuring out what to do with it. So I don't envy your position, but I will say that I have been very grateful to your guidance, your leadership, and your support along the way, to the information and direction that you've provided to me privately and as a group. And I would say this to the citizens out there who are just tuning in now about our budget. This has been going on for months. It's been going on for 18 months, really, since I got here. And there's no reason for anyone in our community to be ignorant about what's going on the budget. We have multiple presentations, multiple videos, all the information you could want about how we got where we are and why we're having to do what we're doing is contained in those presentations and videos. So it's incumbent upon every citizen in our community to own this as much as the rest of everyone else, because they have to get informed and they have to get engaged. And we ask that they do that because maybe there is some fantastic, super idea that we haven't thought of that we need. That'd be super. We're looking for that. And that's why we want you to get them engaged now and to have that dialogue now. So we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to be as open and transparent as we can possibly be about this. But it is incumbent on our residents to get educated as well. They can't take one presentation out of context or one, social media post out of context. They have to own it, and they have to go research it. They have to find out for themselves. And I think then all of our jobs will get easier because we'll work for the same collective. So with that, that's my challenge to the community, and my thanks to you as a city council. Appreciate your support.
Thank you, City Manager Barry.
Thank you.
So with that, the only thing that we have left here under other business is I forgot one important piece, and that was Northern Neighbors Day this past weekend on my schedule. And while I thank the State Fair folks, I have to thank all of the leadership out at Mounted Air Force for a profound weekend performance with not only the United States Thunderbirds, but some of our own local pilots. Mr. Peach put a prop plane right in the palm of my hand, 1,000 feet in the air, dead stick down onto the tarmac. So thanks, Mr. Peach, for not running me over. Other than that, a big thank you to all of our friends up at Mounted Air Force Base. I look forward to those continued relationships growing.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Olson.
I move adjournment.
Second.
Second by Mr. Janser, motion by Alderman Olson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.